Good morning, preppers. Welcome to the next edition of Goshen Prepping. We're going to shift gears today. Instead of talking about specifically news, current events, why to prep, or how to prep and stockpile corned beef hash, we're going to talk about what's happening with you physiologically speaking when you actually get into a panic situation. And guys, don't shut this off. Stay to the end, because I think there's going to be some things in this video that's really going to help you understand you and understanding how you can actually make it through crap hits the fan situations and survive it. Because survival, as far as in the mind goes, your mind, if it goes, your whole body's going to go too. And so I'm going to start off by asking you a question. You ever been in a panic situation? And I mean a truly panic situation. Maybe somebody pulled a knife, maybe you're getting robbed, maybe you got into a pretty bad traffic accident, something like that. The way your brain works, and it goes so fast, basically the thoughts going through, that you have literally, in some situations, split seconds to react to it. And you'll find yourself, after the situation's over, you'll go through it in your mind over and over again to try to figure out what in the world happened. Because when it comes to panic situations, we're usually, not always, but we're usually talking about situations that you really didn't prep for. A stat that I love, when it comes to jet airline crashes, like the big jet airliners, when they go down, we typically see no survivors. I mean, sometimes there's like one person who's like in the back row, it seems, From studies that have been done, looking at autopsies going back for a couple of decades at least of different airline crashes, they estimate that actually, in reality, 22% of the people survive. Well, why is it on the news they say nobody survives? Because then the 22%, they survived the impact, they survived the crash, but they didn't survive after the crash. And why is that? Smoke inhalation, toxic fumes. They weren't able to get away from the airplane itself. I mean, honestly, some may be unconscious in those situations, but either way, some were truly conscious, but weren't able to get away from the plane. Now, wouldn't it be nice if they actually had a situation in which there was a person who could basically guide you and tell you to get away from the plane and get away from the toxic fumes? Well, they do that, obviously. That's what the whole thing about a flight attendant does, is gives you instructions in case there's a crash or a water landing. They tell you to go down the slides, etc. Well, why is it that people still don't survive? Because they don't practice it. It's that simple. They don't practice it. They don't take the plane. Okay, guys, we're taking off in 2 hours. In the meantime, we're going to put the slides out and let you practice. They're not going to do that, obviously. And so without drilling it over and over in your head, you're not going to be able to make the conscious decision, especially in a panic situation. And that's the point. It's a panic situation. Okay, so to be able to learn this lesson, in any lesson as far as survival goes, you must practice, practice, practice. All right, so what happens in the brain? All right, brain physiology is just cool. I love this stuff. You actually have a section in the very front of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. And this is probably, inarguably, the most incredible, complex piece of brain tissue on the planet. Okay, not even talking about just in humans, but on the planet. And it actually works with so many parts of your brain system, like emotions, and connects with your limbic system, flexibility, fear connects here, empathy. But more than anything, it actually is the place where you make very intelligent, conscious decisions as well. Now, that's helpful too, because literally your prefrontal cortex connects to your frontal lobe, which is just behind it. And the frontal lobe is responsible for all your movements and actions. So basically, as you move around and do things. Okay, the best way to understand this, in my opinion, is martial arts. I love martial arts, and when you first get into learning a new move, and the hardest part with, especially somebody who's a novice, they just come on the mat or into the dojo. Very first thing, they've never done anything before, and they'll say, "Okay, I want you to try," and I'll go ahead and just do how about a knife hand? So you come up, pow. You do a knife hand. Now the knife hand, you snap your hand to it. There's all kinds of different techniques. It's not simply just moving out, but you literally practice it. And if you, like example, if you chop somebody right here, that could make them go unconscious. It's really a powerful move. Now the problem is with novices, they'll do this. They'll come up and they'll do it super fast. And that's never what you should do. You want to develop what we call muscle memory. And that's actually what we're talking about, neurologically speaking, is the muscle memory. So in fact, whenever I learn a new move, which is happening all the time, I'll do the move slowly, and practice it over and over, very slow for a long time. There's actually, in some ancient martial arts, they would actually make them practice a move for a year before they could actually even do it. because it doesn't matter if you do it slow or fast, you want the move to be perfect every time. So you practice slow, slow, slow. So when the time comes, you can do it very fast. And it even becomes, as we say in the game, second nature to you. So what's happening is, in your prefrontal cortex, you're making a decision to do that move, and then literally it kind of becomes automatic after that. Very important. It just takes practice. So if you try to do it fast at first, you're probably going to mess it up and it's going to make everything horrible. Okay, so when you're in a situation, let's say you're getting robbed. And obviously I would never recommend to do this unless you truly know what you're doing. But let's say the person has a knife and you know certain moves to be able to take the knife from them. If you know those moves, we're talking about very few people know the moves to be able to handle that situation. It's going to become second nature to do it because you practice. But what about the 99% of us who can't do those moves? Well, your prefrontal cortex kind of gets confused. It's like, should I run? Well, he says not to run. Should I call the police? Well, if I get my phone out, he'll stab me. Should I just scream? He'll probably stab me. So you kind of go through all these thoughts. And even though it took me like 3 seconds to name them, they're going milliseconds fast through your brain. And you're sitting there, you're freezing. You're like, oh, what do I do? And it could very well get you killed. And when it comes to preparedness and prepping, the same goes with this too, by the way. You need to be able to practice these certain techniques. And that's what we're getting at. We'll show you in just a minute. So you got to practice them. Practice over and over again. Because what happens is in a worse situation, somebody's coming to rob you with a knife, fear kicks in. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to even be fear from somebody with a knife robbing you, but fear watching like just the news. Watching the news can actually put you in the same situation. But go ahead, let's say it's a robber, and he comes up with a knife and says, give me all your money. And what happens is in the center of your brain, you actually have it's the size and shape of an almond. It's called the amygdala or amygdaloid nucleus. And besides just rage, by the way, this is the actual small part of the brain that actually works with fear. Fear and rage, by the way. And it's really interesting because there's actually connections with this with like bullies. You know, if somebody's a bully, the reason they're a bully is usually because they're fearful, not because they know everything. And we find that actually people who do know how to handle themselves tend to less the time become bullies. So if you don't know anything and you're scared, you're a scared little man, as we say it sometimes, you become a bully because you want to basically bark loudly so people will say, oh, let's not mess with him. But the bullies will often be the ones who don't really know what to do and they're often ill-prepared. So let's say somebody's coming up with a knife. The amygdaloid nucleus fires and just goes crazy, sends a signal to your prefrontal cortex and says, hey, we need an answer right now. What are you going to do? And as you flip through the different things, you're going to freeze. And obviously that's a very bad situation. Freezing is a very common mistake that people make when it comes to panic situations. And that's what happens why 22% of people die in an airplane crash die from the smoke inhalation. So what do? What can you do as a prepper? Well, we started going over what we call action checklists. There's all kinds of different scenarios that you need to develop for your home. For example, what would you do if you have a fire? What you do in your home is different than what I do in my home, because in my home, I have a very specific shaped house. Maybe you have a single level ranch. Maybe you actually live in an apartment building. So it differs for every person. What happens if there's actually a home invasion? What are you going to do if there's an economic collapse? And the list goes on and on. Well, now in the military, we actually have what are called standard operating procedures, or simply a SOP. And any soldier, it doesn't matter if they're brand new or if they've been doing this for 20 some odd years, all still rely on the standard operating procedure to be able to handle these situations because they have it written right in front of them. You'd be amazed how well that works, by the way. Even if you're in a panic, you can still read and say, oh, I'm supposed to run. Okay, or do whatever I need to do. This is why, like even in a fire, in a like a movie theater, for example, or an office building, you're always going to see signs that says, in case of a fire, there's always a big arrow telling you where to go, because people get in panic, and even though you don't have memorization of where you're supposed to run to in case of a fire, surprisingly, people actually do look at those signs. Hopefully, will anyway, and get out of the fire. So in the military, we train as we would fight. And therefore, you keep practicing over and over and over again with the standard operating procedures. Make it so when the day comes, we actually fight as we train. It becomes second nature. And we want to have it so in those situations, literally, if a soldier gets caught off without his unit, he can actually still carry out his job without supervision. That's the whole purpose of it. And that's what the purpose should be for you as well. Now, when you actually make what I call action checklist, you literally should try to figure out, and I'll help you with other videos later, in case there's a fire in your house. Well, first have smoke detectors in certain locations, how to feel for a door if it's hot, crawl underneath the smoke. What windows are you going to use as an exit? What's your backup location to get out? So you actually need to set up your own standard operating procedures, or as we call them here, just simply action checklist. Because if you don't do this, if you don't think about this and physically write them down, when that amygdala fires and sends a signal to the prefrontal cortex, you're going to freeze and you're going to be another statistic or casualty. Now, again, add this to everything when it comes to preparedness, not just a fire in your house, but everything. Bugging out, stockpiling food, how to prepare food if there's no propane or maybe your electricity is shut off. You need to write these down and actually start a 3-ring binder of what are you going to do in those situations. Because I often have people say, listen, I don't have the money to prep. This doesn't require any money. And over a lot of other things, this very well could save your life. So start your own list of standard operating procedures, or again, just action checklist. Try to brainstorm all the different things that could happen to you. Because when the time comes, especially if you don't practice these things, at least you have it written down and you can grab it and say, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to grab the cat and run, or whatever the case may be. But of course, if you do write these down, practice, 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 practice. And then you may actually find, well, this doesn't work too well. So you change it a little bit and practice, 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 and get this down, because not only may your life depend on it, but the life of your family as well. Okay, I hope this helps and I hope you get going with this. If you have any questions, by all means, put them in the comments below. Be glad to help out.